Boreda, a croeso cynnes y Brifysgol Metropolitan Cardiff. Good morning and a warm welcome to Cardiff Metropolitan University. And I'm really sorry that we're unable to meet in person, but I'm delighted to be able to open today's conference, Champion Inclusivity and Diversity in Industry and Academia, on behalf of my colleagues in the Department of Tourism, Hospitality and Events here at Cardiff Met. And Vice-Chancellors spend a lot of time opening conferences and events, and it's always a particular pleasure for me at Cardiff Met, where so many of the topics that we have conferences on, I also have a long-standing interest in and commitment to, and perhaps none more so than equality, diversity and inclusion, and in tourism and related areas of hospitality, events, and wider cultural relations. And it's actually 14 years since, as a professor of human geography and then director of the Centre for Leisure, Tourism and Society at UE Bristol, I led a UK collaboration with universities in Wales, and the representative was Cardiff Met, and in Scotland, where the representative institution was Stirling. And we ran an ESRC seminar series titled Tourism, Inequality and Social Justice. And the passion that colleagues here had for working with industry to broaden access and opportunities for both those experiencing and delivering tourism, hospitality and events was clear then, and it's remained a core theme within the teaching and research in the department. And I'm particularly pleased to see that today's conference covers issues of inequality in relation to race, disability, gender and sexuality, and wider inequalities of social, cultural and economic capital. It's even longer, I think 20 years since I published some articles in Disability and Society and Annals of Leisure Research, critiquing definitions of leisure and summarised in a paper published by the Leisure Studies Association, where I referred to a disabled leisure studies. And some of you might be more familiar with my own work in gender and feminist studies, where I sought to explain and to explore what I termed the social cultural nexus of gender power relations, or the ways in which structural inequalities in society and economy can produce, legitimize and reproduce inequality and exclusion. But it's this same relationship or nexus between the structures and the cultures that we can challenge, disrupt and transform through our interventions in policy and practice, underpinned of course by a rigorous evidence base and supported by an industry that wishes to be progressive. So 2 decades on from when I might have been able to claim to be engaged in these debates in an academic sense, it's now down to the next generation, to the people in this conference, to ensure that this pivotal moment in our history, brought about by the global pandemic and the resulting crash, temporarily, we hope, of the tourism, hospitality and events industry, this moment is one where we need to ensure that we reshape those structural and cultural power relations to transform an industry to meet the needs of what we here in Wales refer to as the well-being of future generations. And the othering and colonialism in tourism that I was writing about 20 years ago is still evident today. But we do have issues of racial inequality and homophobia more firmly in the spotlight. And we have this moment, I believe, to disrupt these existing, long-standing and hugely harmful inequalities, and to unleash much greater potential for industry, a potential that can meet the goals of the Future Generation Wales Act, the UK Levelling Up goals, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this, I believe, is our task in developing strong partnerships between academia and industry to ensure that, Build Back Better isn't just a Westminster slogan or a piece of rhetoric, but it includes the devolved nation's commitments to building forward in a greener and a fairer way. So this is our task today, and I want to thank you for participating in today's conference as both speakers and delegates. And I wish to thank particularly my colleagues here at Cardiff Met, especially Vicky, Daryl, Emmett, Helen, Kasia and Nick for organising the conference, and for our events team and Gwen particularly for running the conference today. I hope you have a really great day and thank you for participating.
Thank you, Cara, for that really warm welcome and for really setting the scene for our conference today. I personally did utilise some of your research when I was doing my PhD, so thank you, and it was really, really important, insightful work from you. Thank you. So welcome everyone. Croeso pawb to the Championing Inclusivity and Diversity in Industry in Academia for Tourism, Hospitality and Events for our conference today. I'm Dr. Vicky Richards and I'm a Senior Lecturer in Tourism and Events Management, and I'm also the module leader for our Diversity and Social Inclusion module. I'm very delighted to welcome our speakers today. So in the first part, we're going to hear from Dr. Emma Bettinson, Dr. Aylwyn Iafeli, Professor Andrew Campbell, Colin Heyman, and Sheena Corey. So after all the presenters have spoken, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And if you wish to ask a question verbally or to sign a question, then please just raise your online hand and we'll be able to give you permission to turn your camera and microphone on. Of course, you're very welcome to type a question in the Q&A section if you prefer. If you require the live captions, then please turn these on the bottom of your screen. We also have 2 trainee BSL interpreters in each part of the event. So in this part, we have Leslie and Liz. So welcome to them as well. So every part of this event will be recorded and all 3 sessions will be available to catch up on demand a few days after using the same link for the event webpage. So to start things off, we're going to hear from Dr. Emma Bettinson, who is the Head of Department for the Tourism, Hospitality and Events here at Cardiff Met. So over to you, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Good morning, everybody. As Vicky's just said, my name's Dr. Emma Bettinson and I am the Head of Department for Tourism, Hospitality and Events here at Cardiff Met. I'd like to echo Cara and Vicky in thanking you all for attending today's conference and wish you a warm welcome to Cardiff Met and in particular to the Department of Tourism, Hospitality and Events, albeit virtually this time. Here in the department, we recognise that the tourism, hospitality, events industries are making considerable progress in challenging exclusion and striving to be inclusive for all. However, we also realise there's still work to be done to raise awareness and support the development of skills in the sector, and we're striving to play our part in developing that awareness amongst our students and staff. 5 years ago, as Vicky mentioned, we began delivering a compulsory module to all our first year students across the department called Diversity and Social Inclusion for THE. Ably led, of course, by Vicky herself. The module aims to embed inclusion by raising awareness and equipping our students with the knowledge and the practical skills that they're going to need as future managers in our industries and as global citizens. The students really enjoy this module and have been very fortunate to benefit from sharing the knowledge and experiences of a variety of guest speakers, many of whom are here today. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank those speakers for giving their time to do this. Not only has this module provided a safe space for both staff and students to have conversations and break down barriers, it's also inspired many students to pursue these interests into their final projects, where we've seen a marked increase in projects relating to diversity in areas such as gender, sexual orientation, accessible tourism, event experiences, and others. We're particularly proud to have 2 of our recent graduates speaking later today. This conference aims to build on this work and to celebrate and champion diversity and social inclusion. It promises to be a fascinating morning, which will showcase the good practice that's happening and allow for conversations between students, industry, and academics. So all that remains for me to say is a huge thank you to all our speakers today, to you for attending, and to Vicky, her organising committee, and everyone in the events team for making this day happen. I hope you enjoy the day.
Thank you very much, Emma. So now we're going to hear from Dr. Elwyn Yafeli, and he is the Race Equality Strategy Lead here at Cardiff Metropolitan University. Thank you, Elwyn.
Thank you, Vicky. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending the conference. Welcome. My name is Dr. Elwyn Yafeli, and I am Head of Department in Business Management and Law here at Cardiff Metropolitan University. I'm also Chair of the Race Equality Charter Task and Finish Group. I'm briefly going to outline some of the work that we're doing here at Cardiff Met to address racial inequalities. Next slide, please. I'm going to start off by giving you some brief background and context to the work that we're doing, and then explain what we are addressing here at Cardiff Metropolitan University. So for several years, we have all witnessed, we have heard, we have read about the different experiences and treatment of minority ethnics in the UK and abroad. Most of you will know about some high-profile cases of mistreatment. For example, Stephen Lawrence in 1993, Leon Briggs, 2013, Belly Mujinga in 2020, Minna Smallman in the same year, Bianca Williams, and even closer to home, Mohammed Hassan in 2020 in Cardiff. We all know about the case of George Floyd. These are undoubtedly high-profile cases, but they unfortunately highlight that as a society, we have a long way to go in terms of attaining racial equality. Racial inequalities are deep-rooted and pervade across various areas, including living standards, healthcare, employment, and more closer to us, education. There are several reports that document the disparities between minority ethnic students and their white counterparts in areas such as academic progression, attainment gap, and graduate outcomes, to name a few. Cardiff Metropolitan University is thus focusing on eradicating these differences and is committed to promoting racial equality. Here at Cardiff Met, we have committed to submit for the Race Equality Charter Award. So what is it? In summary, the Race Equality Charter Award is a vehicle for implementing continuous improvement through addressing racial inequalities. It provides a framework for universities to improve representation, progression, and success of minority ethnic staff and students. In terms of how we're doing this at the university, so the first thing that we have done is setting up the Race Equality Charter Task and Finish Group, which I am chairing. And the committee comprises of academic staff, professional services staff, and students. Our role is primarily to promote areas of good practice, identify, address, and facilitate the positive change that we want to see in terms of racial equality. Next slide, please. Some of the areas that we have identified as part of the Race Equality Charter and Task and Finish Group to address include ensuring that our staff recruitment practices are those which attract more local ethnic minority candidates, looking at enhancing the attractiveness of our courses to local ethnic minority applicants. We are looking at enhancing the training, development, and mentoring support that is offered by the university. We're going to be reviewing the complaints, grievance, and discrimination reporting mechanisms, including ensuring diverse panels where we deal with these matters. We're addressing progression disparities, attainment gap, and graduate outcome disparities. And we are also ensuring that we are utilizing a university-wide approach so that no one is left behind and this work is adequately resourced. As a wraparound to this work, we will be launching the conversation in September 2021. This will involve a series of events where colleagues and students have a safe space to discuss, to learn, and to debate matters of race. And this is just an outline of some of the work that we're doing here at Cardiff Met. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Elwyn, and I'm sure that we'll all be looking forward to that launch in September, particularly with the students. So thank you very much for that outline. Okay, so now moving on now to Professor Andrew Campbell from the Wales Tourism Alliance. Over to you, Andrew.
Boridar, good morning. What do you call a Welshman who's good at writing poetry? Diverse. What do you call a Welshman who's good at writing poetry about outer space? Diverse ET. Apologies for going back to my roots on teacher training practice. It was all about getting people's attention, and humour is a good way of getting people's attention. And I would just like to extend my thanks for the invitation to come along to your conference today, which is extremely worthwhile and just so very important. I'm chair of the Wales Tourism Alliance, which represents 7,000 tourism businesses in Wales. We are effectively the private voice of the industry, so we make representation to government. And I would just like to make a few broad comments and a few specific comments relating to our industry at this present time. Well, firstly, I'd like to commend the Welsh Government for all their work in promoting fair work within the workplace in their attempt to make Wales a more equal and more fair and just society. It's really important. Fair work is about fair reward and where workers are heard and represented, where rights are respected. And the Fair Work Commission, as you might have picked up during your module studies here at the university, that report came out pre-COVID, and it's got some really good stuff in, some really interesting things, and is very appropriate for our industry at the moment. Although we have many employers in Wales who do honour many of the principles and the recommendations that were made in that report, there is still a bit of a way to go. One of our big challenges in the industry is to change the perceptions of the industry, and this report and the work that Welsh Government are doing with regard to fair work will go some way to actually helping that. At the current time, we have a huge recruitment crisis. It's been covered very widely in the media, and it's having a real devastating effect with our ability to cope with increasing numbers of visitors coming to Wales. We've lost a lot of staff. They've migrated to other professions, and staff are working more and getting burnt out, and we have a little bit of a crisis going on. And this fair work agenda, I think, will help to try and address that very difficult challenge. I do think, honestly, that fair work and the reason why people are migrating away from our industry are closely tied up with some of the things that we have to do to make the industry much more attractive, fairer, and sustainable to work in. As part of this, I've actually returned to the front line. I've gone to work for a local hotel group. So apart from my duties as the chair of the Wales Tourism Alliance, I really wanted to do my bit and return to an industry from whence I grew my career. I was a hotel management graduate all those years ago, and I've been in the industry, and I've returned to the front line. And it's interesting, it really is interesting getting on the tools again and to be talking to my fellow colleagues about life and about really surviving on £9 an hour. And it really is heart-wrenching to hear some of the stories about life right at the end of the low pay threshold. And you know, we have something to do with that. So those insights are really important. Part of my job in the Wales Tourism Alliance is to speak out about issues that affect our industry, that affect our businesses. And last week I had to respond, or I did make a response, a very strong response to the Welsh Government's proposal and intention to implement a tourism tax in Wales. And I did an interview and a press release has gone out and it got a little bit of wide coverage. And unfortunately, with the media, as you all know, you don't always get all the stuff across when it isn't picked up, and you know, some of the salient points and important points are often missed in the media coverage. But one of the points I wanted to make in the context of building a fairer Wales and to challenge the First Minister was really the impact, and going back to that point about earning £9 an hour. If you are putting a tax on staying in, because at the moment it just looks like an accommodation tax, an additional tax for people who don't earn very much is something which isn't entirely helpful. Many people at the very low end of the pay scale find it very difficult to take holidays, and maybe you've picked up on this with regard to social tourism models, which we need to do more of in Wales, but to actually make holidays more expensive for them isn't particularly helpful. And I think that needs to be factored into some of the other inconsistencies with regard to introducing a tourism tax, which aren't being covered. So that's just a very general point. There are good things happening in the industry. We are seeing employers committing themselves to writing within their mission statements, values and policies to eradicate discrimination, to make life much fairer and more equal. And we applaud that, so that's good. I actually sit on other committees. I'm invited to do that doing this particular job. Just to use one example of a committee I sit on, I'm a board member of Ports Past and Present, which is an Interreg project, and that's about developing links between Wales and Ireland. And the Ports Past and Present project is about developing tourism growth between the ports of Holyhead and Dublin and Fishguard and Rosslare and Pembroke Dock. And it's about bringing those communities together as well. And it's really heartening to see that the core theme of that particular project is diversity. So much energy goes into diversity. And some of the things that we are doing to try and address that is to improve digital accessibility, to help and support people with their IT skills. One of the things with COVID is that we've now moved into a much more advanced digital situation, which is all very good. And we've been trying to move that agenda along for a long time, but it is leaving people behind. In my job at the hotel, I'm continually being asked and confronted by guests who can't work the apps and can't order food and can't book in advance and all that sort of thing. So there is a fair amount of work still to do with regard to digital accessibility to make life a little more inclusive for people, and the Ports Past and Present has a real emphasis on that. One of the other parts of the project that I like to address social exclusion and poverty is to give tutorials and help to people within those port areas to help them with grant applications, which is a skill in itself. And very often we find people who are very good at getting grants are people who are highly skilled at actually writing the actual forms. And there is a skill in that. So that's good as well. And it's about trying to address the engagement of people in those communities. And very often interesting enough, in coastal and rural communities, committees are often driven by incomers and not local people themselves. So when we talk about inclusiveness, we really need to include people, Indigenous people, who often feel a little left out, with people who move into areas and take over committees, in inverted commas, and those voices are not heard. And I can give you another example of that. We have a number of cruise ships. I'm speaking to you from Fishguard, which is the jewel in the crown of the North Pembrokeshire coast. And we have cruise ships coming in. They started coming in 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the ideas that we thought would be rather good would be to host lunches for many of these cruise passengers. Many of them are American people. And so we, started opening our doors to host people for lunch, to have conversations, because as you know, in tourism, it's about the conversations that are very important, and the cruise passengers really enjoyed that. But the cruise companies actually came back after a while and said, please, could we have some local people who spoke Welsh? And I think that really sums up the story, that we weren't getting that engagement from local communities. So there's still a job of work to do with that. Okay, so I'm very conscious of my shortage of time here. We have an emphasis in that project on women's voices and bilingual coverage, and with all the minutes, we look at the gender makeup, and all those things highlight, I think, and acknowledge the importance of having equality and balance in all the activities we do. So in concluding some of the comments I want to make, one of the things about being older is that you can have a perspective, and I've seen real progress with regard to changes that have been made to address many of these issues, particularly within the area of disability in tourism, which has gone very well, which has still got a way to go. We've still got huge challenges, as was pointed out earlier in the introductions for this particular conference. It's good to see more female leaders within our sector, and that's good. That's good too. One of the things that I've always gone on about for many, many years, and I'm just going to hold up a load of brochures here, is the fact that I think tourism promotion's got a way to go. I just slipped down to pick some brochures up before I spoke to you this morning. And again, it just, there's a sense of dismay with regard to the portrayal of the visitors who are put in these brochures. It doesn't really cover the whole remit and groupings of people who live in our society. And so it's essentially Anglo-white middle class, which comes across on the brochures. And, you know, I've been saying that for a number of years, and I think we've still got a job of work to do on that. I think we have, we will be watching coming out of COVID. We certainly didn't see this recruitment crisis coming out of COVID. We were concentrating on financial support, and we didn't think people would migrate away from the industry so much. And I think going forward, we don't know how other impacts coming out of COVID are going to implode within many of the things that you're talking about today. So we are entering new territory with regard to the way that people have been affected and isolated in society, and the impacts that that's going to have on Wales tourism. So perhaps for your conference next year, we could look at some of the things that we haven't even thought about or thought so much about to address how our industry copes and moves forward. I think we could do more. As a finishing note, I think, you know, I like some of the moves that the aviation sector make to offset carbon footprint, the carbon impacts of aviation travel, and you buy a tree and you do offsetting. I think maybe we could do some offsetting within our own particular sector. I think we could, you know, help the development of entrepreneurial education by getting companies and organizations to perhaps donate to help people from low wage and from backgrounds who aren't able to access entrepreneurial education, which I think is the way forward to build businesses. We prepare young people for the world of work, but I'm not quite sure whether we do enough to actually build their competence in building business, and that entrepreneurial spirit. So perhaps monies and resources could be put in to providing workshops and educational programs for that. But that's just a final note. I think my time's up. Thank you very much for the invitation again. Thanks, thank you, and I hope the conference goes well.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was a lot of information, lots of details, and we do appreciate you sharing, the landscape and how the industry is coping and all the issues which, are good and still what the challenges are. And I can see there will definitely be lots of conversations after today. So moving on now to introduce you to Colin Heyman, who is an equality and diversity consultant, and who I first came across on a webinar from the Race Equality, I believe it was. So really nice to see you again, and thank you. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Vicky, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. As Vicky said, I work as a trainer, consultant around equality, diversity and inclusion with organisations and individuals. And really the main aim of my work is to make it discussable. Aylwin mentioned about starting to have discussions, and I really don't see how we can move forward as organisations, as a society, without being able to discuss these issues. So I'm going to start with a bit of a story. I was on holiday with two lesbian friends, and we arrived at our bed and breakfast. The guy who welcomes us, he seems rather old school, shorts even though it's pretty cool outside, and bad jokes. He shows us round the dining room, the lounge and so on. Then, I'll show you your bedrooms, he said. The single is downstairs and the double is up. And then he hesitated. We could kind of see his mind working, thinking how to ask about sleeping arrangements. And after a couple of false starts, he says, so who is in the single room? Rather than, which of you women is with the bloke? This is a small incident, but it's stuck in my mind because I think it demonstrates a couple of really important things around diversity and inclusion. It's played out in moment-to-moment relationships between people, here in how you ask a question. And also, we can all make a difference. That guy made a difference to our holiday. There are lots of ways that tourism, hospitality and events can be a welcoming place for disadvantaged groups, but there's also lots of ways in which it can be an unwelcoming place. And Sheena will be giving some practical examples after me of how to make it welcoming. In these 10 minutes, I just want to give an overview of and focus very briefly on a few key points for organisations and also for us as individuals. Firstly, why should organisations care about this issue? For me, it's a business issue. We live in an increasingly diverse society. If we want to appeal to all our potential market, if we want to recruit the best talent, that means we have to be welcoming for employees and for customers. But to get to that is a journey. It's not a one-off, it's not even a year's work. Organisations need to be consistent and persistent. And it's often, in my experience, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But there is progress. And secondly, it's about culture, not policies. Policies are useful, they provide a boundary, but it's about how people behave, what's okay and what isn't, the behaviours. Like I said, the moment-to-moment interactions between people. But to establish that organizational culture, we need leadership from the top. And that's leadership that doesn't just talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion. It's actually what leaders do to establish the culture, not what they say, how they demonstrate that it's important to them, in how they are with other people, in the importance that they give to these issues, in the resources they give to them, and in their ability to accept feedback when they get it wrong. But actually, I don't think leadership from the top is enough. I often work with groups of champions in organizations that support each other to bring about change in organizations. And this complements leadership from the top. And when I talk about champions, I don't mean champions who's BAME, a champion who's gay, and so on. What I mean is a group of champions from across the organization. Some of them may be from disadvantaged groups, but a lot of them will be allies. And that brings me on to allyship. what we can do as individuals, and how those of us who have privilege can be allies to disadvantaged groups. If we can go on to the slide, please, Gwen. So this slide is actually about racism, but you can use it as a model around any of the disadvantaged groups. And this is about becoming anti-racist, as I say, it could be anti-gay, anti-classist, whatever. And it divides it into 3 zones. In the fear zone, we deny racism as a problem. We avoid hard questions. We strive to be comfortable. And we talk to others who think and look like us. In the learning zone, we progress to recognizing racism is a present and current problem, seeking out questions that make us uncomfortable, understanding our own privilege around race, educating ourselves about race and structural racism, and being vulnerable about our own knowledges and knowledge gaps and biases, and listening to others who think and look differently from us. And the final zone is growth zone. That's where we identify how we may benefit from racism, promote and advocating for policies and leaders that are anti-racist. It's about sitting with our discomfort, speaking out when we see racism in action, educating our peers, trying to influence them about how racism harms our profession and our society, not letting mistakes deter us from being better, yielding positions of power to those who are otherwise marginalized, and surrounding ourselves with people who think and look differently from me. And just to pick up a couple of those points, I think it is uncomfortable. I think it's easier for us to ignore this stuff. But for me, one of the most important things in starting to do work around this is recognizing our own biases. And I feel it's really important to get away from the idea that either you're racist and that means you're a bad person, or you're not racist and that means you're okay. I was brought up in the 60s and 70s in a very white setting. And there's no way, with all that stuff going on around me, that I could have completely eradicated all the racism I was brought up with. And that doesn't mean I'm a bad person, but it does mean that I take responsibility for doing something about it and changing things. And a lot of the things the model suggests are internal, like that, like educating ourselves. There's loads of resources, films, books, TED Talks, and if anybody wants a list, I'm very happy to give you one, which is around how you, getting to know more about what the issues are, what the history is, and so on. So those 2 things are quite internal, recognizing our own bias and educating ourselves. Externally, there's some important things we can do as well. And the first one is including equality, diversity, and inclusion in all that we do. It's very easy for those of us who are from privileged groups to think, well, it's okay for us, so it'll be okay for everybody. To put on this event at 9 o'clock in the morning is fine because my partner will take the children to school, or whatever. Having the meeting in the evening is fine, because I don't mind driving in the dark, forgetting that for some older people that may not be okay. So it's very easy to forget what the barriers are. And again, I've got an example. I remember hearing on the radio a park ranger who is of Indian heritage being interviewed about how she'd got interested in the outdoors, because, as the interviewer said, we don't see so many people from your background here. Well, she said, the first thing is that often our diet is not catered for. And then she went on to recount her own experience of encountering the outdoors. The first time I came out, she said, I was out walking in a group and people were wearing all this strange equipment. So I went round and I asked them, where do I buy that? So then I went and bought it. And the next time I went out, I took it with me. And this time I asked the people, how do I put it on? I'm a walker myself, and being brought up, you know, with OS maps and the equipment and just stopping anywhere and going for a walk, this interview made me realize how much I take for granted, how much I used to assume that the countryside and walking is open to anyone, forgetting all the barriers like this that are there. And, you know, it's very easy for all of us to do that and to forget the small challenges that face people from disadvantaged groups much of the time. So as allies, we can always raise the diversity and inclusion issue when we're planning events. When you're planning events, who's on the panel? Do they look representative of our diverse society? It may not be about diversity and inclusion, but how are we including diversity and inclusion? Creating facilities and visitor and attractions that are accessible and welcoming for all groups. Other things we can do as allies, I think it's really important to challenge. There's lots of stuff around language, around what people do. I think the really important thing is not to keep quiet. Particularly, but not to tell people off either. I really like the idea of challenging, sort of saying, what do you mean? I'm not sure about that. Let's have a discussion about that. Because I really want to open up the conversation, not close it down. But actually keeping quiet doesn't bring change. And I think that we can all gradually have an influence by challenging, by getting these things discussed. A third thing I'd say is noticing when disadvantaged people aren't being included in discussions as colleagues, or they're not being listened to as customers. Often I see in meetings that women, Black people are trying to get in and they're spoken over, or when they do get in, their ideas aren't listened to. And it's easy for us as allies just to notice this and say, oh, I see so-and-so is trying to get in, or so-and-so came up with an interesting idea. Let's come back to that. I'd like to discuss it more. So yeah, supporting people of colour, supporting people from disadvantaged groups. I come back lastly, and these are just a few of the things we can do, but I come back lastly to that guy in charge of the bed and breakfast that I was at with my friends. And I don't think he's the person we would expect to be an advocate around these issues, a pioneer around these issues. I have to be careful of not stereotyping myself, but he didn't seem like that. But by asking that open question, rather than assuming we were all straight, he enhanced the experience, not only for my gay friends, but for me too. Because if he hadn't asked it like that, they'd have been upset. And of course, I would have been upset that they were upset. I am a great believer in the ripple effect. That by taking action affecting those around us, we can send out ripples and influence people, who then influence people around them. So my message to you is move to action. You can make a difference where you are. Don't wait to work it all out or to be sure you won't get it wrong, because actually, as people from privileged groups, we will get it wrong sometime, and that's something for us to learn from. But we can all take action where we are and influence those around us and be a force for change. Change comes partly from leadership from the top, but it also comes from all of us affecting those around us. So be a force for change, do what makes sense to you, and act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin. That was really insightful. Thank you for your examples and also for leaving us with some tips and things to think about going forward. So now we move on to Sheena Corey, who is the owner of the Forge Glamping in Corwen, and she is also an equality and diversity consultant. Thank you, Sheena. Over to you.
Diolch, Vicky. Thank you, Vicky. Bore da pawb. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here this morning. I come wearing two hats, really. So as Vicky said, I'm an equality and diversity consultant. I work for a company called Brooke Graham, who are a part of a global law firm. But I also run a glamping site and an outdoor skills business up here in Denbighshire, just outside Corwen. So one of the reasons that I wanted to come and talk to you today really was just to try and bring to life some of the things that we've been doing on the ground really, and give you some sort of practical examples. My partner set up his business about 10 years ago. He's a bushcraft and survival expert and has spent a long time working with young people and vulnerable adults, particularly in schools in deprived areas. And one of the things we wanted to do when we set up our business was really to kind of bring together my experience of working in the corporate world with his experience of working with particularly with underprivileged and underrepresented groups. So some of the things that really, so I wanted to start with some statistics really, just to kind of remind ourselves of the situation that we're in, and I know that Colin has mentioned some of those as well, but I found it quite shocking recently looking at a Natural England study that only 1% of visitors to UK national parks are from minority ethnic backgrounds, and only 1% of mountain leaders and rock climbing instructors are from minority ethnic backgrounds as well. And some other stats as well, there's approximately 9.5 million disabled people in the UK, and only about 600,000 of those are active in the outdoors. So some really kind of I found to be quite shocking statistics, and one of the reasons that we wanted to set up the Forge was really to try and make the outdoors more accessible and more inclusive for people who perhaps wouldn't necessarily get an opportunity to do that. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. I've just included some pictures here just to bring to life a little bit what we do up here, but the Forge essentially is a glamping site. We can accommodate 20 people. We are in quite a rural area in northeast Wales up here. And one of the things that we did when we were designing the Forge was to make sure that we were creating a space that was safe physically, but also psychologically for different groups who are seeking greater privacy and protection. So we have laid out the tents in such a way that people can have their own privacy, but also if they want to connect with other people, they can do. Our opening weekend was actually for a group of 17 members of the LGBT community who are from a deaf charity in Hull. So we started as we meant to go on, and in fact members of that group have continued to come and stay with us. So I think one of the things that we did quite early on was to build a reputation for being a safe place for people to come and spend their holidays, and then once they've come and felt safe as a group, then they tend to come back as individuals as well. We do a lot of work with autism charities, so we work quite closely with families who are looking for practical support, and we get such phenomenal feedback from those families whose children have been outside away from their screens, they've been socialising around a campfire, they sleep better, they have interactions that they wouldn't have had otherwise, and the element of that is just so rewarding as well. We also make sure that we can make accommodations for any disabilities, visible or invisible. We recently had a wild swim weekend, and this lovely lady here, Megan, was deaf, and we made sure that we were able to accommodate her and her needs as part of the swimming weekend as well. We do a lot of work with bushcraft and outdoor survival skills, and we really try and target groups, particularly from the West Midlands, which is our sort of near catchment area, and help to build people's confidence in being outside in the woods, in rural areas, giving them opportunities that they wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise. And I think the other thing as well is just making sure that when we're creating new spaces, we're designing them to be inclusive from the outset. So it's not an afterthought to add a ramp or to think about, you know, how do we make changes to what we've already built, but it's really kind of putting ourselves in the shoes of people who may have different abilities and making sure that that stays at the forefront of our project. So when we're starting to build new spaces as well. I think the other thing we do as well is that we try and make sure that we're not gendered in how we position our courses and how we position all of our marketing as well. So we wholeheartedly encourage women and girls to get involved in some of our knife making courses, our bow and arrow making courses, axe throwing. All of these activities are very much non-gendered, and they're accessible to everyone. I myself have two girls who are 6 and 8, and they're very much leading the charge in this respect. So wanting to make sure that there's no element of, you know, this is for the boys and this is for the girls. We're not about that at all. So I think one of the things that I found most rewarding, just in how we've been open now for into our 4th season, is really how that reputation starts to snowball, and you get a positive effect of people from different backgrounds coming to stay with us. So this week, for example, we've got a Sri Lankan family staying at the moment, and we also have 4 members of the LGBT community. I was thinking about your story, Colin, on you know, and just in things about how, you know, the little moments that you have. So we send everybody a text message the night before they arrive. We ask them how they would like the tents to be set up in terms of beds. We don't assume that people, because it's 4 adults, it's going to be, you know, 2 doubles or 4 singles or whatever. It's just making sure that you put that forethought in beforehand, so that when people arrive, they immediately feel comfortable, and they don't feel like they're you know, that people are making assumptions about them. positively or negatively. I think one of the other things that we found really important as well, I was reading a report recently by Dr. Chakrabarti from the University of Leicester. He was talking about the fact that something that Professor Andrew Campbell talked about earlier on around this middle class stigma of people not feeling that they are welcome, or that they would feel that they would fit in, or that it's the outdoors and being in a glamping situation wouldn't be for them. And a lot of that is about how they would integrate into the local community. And one of the things that we've done from the outset is really thinking about how do we bring the local community and local children and local projects that are going on to the Forge and integrate them with people who are staying here as well. So there's a little bit of integration going on, a little bit of education going on. And I think one of the things that Dr. Chakrabarti talked about was it's not overt racism and people are not bigoted as such, but there's this discomfort of difference. And I think particularly in rural Wales, this can be quite a barrier to people wanting to come out and try glamping and try going for a walk up and with or whatever it is. And I think that's one of the things that we've always tried to focus on as well, is trying to get that integration going a little bit more as well. I'll just move to the next slide, please. So I just put together some tips around becoming a more inclusive tourism business. This is just something that we've, from our own experience, and I'm sure there's hundreds more tips that we could come up with as well. But I think one of the things that we've been very keen to do as we've built our team is being very clear about why being inclusive is a benefit for our business and getting everybody on board with that. So we understand that there's a huge market out there of people who would be so keen to come out and try some of the things that we offer, and actually just making sure that when they come out, when they find out about us on websites, etc., is that all of that makes them feel welcome, makes them feel comfortable, puts them at ease that this is something that they could do, and it's making sure that our team understand why we do that as well. As I said before as well, designing new spaces inclusively, this is really important for us as well. We're still building different barns and cabins and things like that, and not all of our spaces are accessible to everybody, but we just make sure that there is always an option for people who are maybe wheelchair users, for example, so that they can still come and get involved in what we're doing here. The third one is a really important one, I think, is growing your teams to reflect the demographic and the culture of the market. So as we've already pointed out, you don't necessarily particularly in rural areas, you don't necessarily have the same demographic that you might have in cities or in more urban areas. But we've worked really hard to build a team that are very inclusive in their outlook. So rather than, perhaps controversially, rather than recruiting for people who have hospitality and customer service skills, we've also combined that with people who demonstrated very inclusive behaviours, who've grown up with sometimes living abroad, who've got some experience of different cultures, so they have a much heightened sense of empathy and cultural awareness. And we felt that was more important than actually some of the sort of tactical, practical skills which we could help to build and train them in once they got here. And that has been so important because they just understand the language to use. They are they to your points that you were thinking about, Colin, before, they don't make assumptions about people, and they're very alert to diversity and inclusion, essentially. And so that has been a really important thing for us, and it means that our ethos is now being lived out through our team as well, who are on the front line dealing with our guests. I think the other thing we do as well is making sure that people feel comfortable and confident, and that means that it's spending time to think about how every guest experience is going to be a bit different. So thinking about what aspects of glamping and being outdoors might they find challenging or unfamiliar, and how do we help them, for example, just light a fire. We can't assume that everybody knows how to light a fire or a log burner. They don't know how to perhaps which plants to leave alone, or we had somebody who didn't know, they'd never seen nettles before, for example. It's all of these things is just thinking about put yourself in the shoes of the guests and think about what might be some of the things that you could do to make their experience a more positive one when they get into the outdoors. And then finally, probably quite a simple one, but really, really important, we found, is making sure that all your website and communication channels are accessible, and thinking about your marketing approach as well, and how do you make sure that you're reflecting the community and the market that you want to get in all your marketing material. I know Professor Andrew Campbell was talking about the brochures earlier on as well, and that's something that we're really keen to do as well in everything that we put out there into the market as well. So I'll pause there. I just wanted to say, so in my final comments really was just to say I genuinely love what we do and what we're building at the Forge, and there is genuinely no greater pleasure than seeing people light their own campfire for the first time, or experience just cooking their own food on a campfire. It's incredibly rewarding, and I think particularly more so for those who wouldn't necessarily have felt included, would have felt excluded from doing that, from being in a rural environment. I think it's so important as well after the year we've had, getting people outside. There's so many benefits to being outside, both physically, mentally and socially, and I think especially after the pandemic, I think this is a real priority. So thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions at the end, and I'll hand it back to you, Vicky.
Thank you, Sheena. That was a really interesting presentation, and thank you for sharing what you've been doing at the Forge. There were lots of words that were sticking out there for me. So things like being comfortable, confident, being truly inclusive by not making assumptions about people. And I think those are threads throughout everything. Okay, so that's all of our speakers. So thank you very much for that. Thank you everyone for listening. So now's our chance to have a bit of a Q&A session, your opportunity to ask our presenters any questions that have come to mind while you've been listening. So you can either put something in the Q&A in the box down there, or please feel free to raise your hand, and you can either come on camera or just speak your question, and I will ask all the presenters to put their cameras on if they'll come back, and we can see them all. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we do have some questions in the Q&A. So we'll get started with those. So as we go along, please continue to add them in there. Okay, so it looks like we have a first one here for Aylwyn. So do you think there is a difference in the recruitment of people from ethnic minorities within the HE sector depending on location?
That's an interesting question. In terms of differences, I've certainly been involved with some research which has been looking at recruitment within schools, in particular of ethnic minority staff. And what we have certainly found is that in certain areas, particularly in Cardiff, for example, there are very few minority ethnic teachers that are recruited into the teaching profession, and also the sentiments from the teachers were expressing how difficult they found finding jobs within the teaching profession in the city. Across the HE sector, I think the location may have an impact, but I don't have any sort of research evidence around this. But certainly what I have found is that in certain areas you will have, particularly in the London universities, you will have a more diverse staff body right across through to senior management teams compared to other areas.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you. Maybe we need to look at some more research around this area then going forward. Okay, so this is for Professor Andrew. So it's interesting to hear about your thoughts on accessibility to holidays for people on low incomes. Have you come across any organisations that offer lower prices for these disadvantaged groups? And is this something you think could be implemented in, for example, visitor attraction settings?
That's a very good question. Certainly there are pockets of individuals, but it's driven by a personal outlook, I think. I mean, this is, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think we need to do much more work in this respect. I mean, certainly at the moment, because it's a supply and demand issue, one of the sad things is that people have taken advantage to put their prices up, actually. So that's actually accentuated the sadness of people on low incomes who are able to take a holiday at all. I mean, we've tried within Wales, I think the average price increase from what I've heard is about 30%, but I know to Cornwall, I heard of a caravan going for a week outside St Ives last week for £3,500. I mean, they've been doubling their prices in the southwest of England from what we hear. And so you can understand businesses trying to recoup all that lost income, but we do need to do more, and I think there's a real job of work there. I haven't got any specific examples, but I do speak to people who have a more altruistic view towards the world, and they have not put their prices up, and they are sensitive towards the needs of different sectors of our society, as we are on this call today.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question, are there any tools to implement real diversity, equality and inclusion in tourism enterprises and to avoid the biases? Don't know who wants to try and answer that one. Colin, are you going for it?
I don't mind talking a bit about that. I mean, I suppose something I'd say about that is that it's not necessarily a question of tools and techniques. It is a journey. There's often not a right answer about how to do it. But just a few sort of hints, if you like. I think one thing is, Sheena talked about recruiting a diverse workforce. You're far more likely to be able to get over those biases, those assumptions, if you have a diverse workforce who can say, hang on, you know, you haven't thought of this or you haven't thought of that. Or if you partner with organizations who represent different disadvantaged groups or groups that don't access tourism so much, and talk with them about what it is. And I think the other thing is just slowing down and just thinking all the time about where's diversity and inclusion in this. I think so often diversity and inclusion, I mean, we're all working from home at the moment, and the sort of analogy I think of is that the diversity and inclusion is over there in a box in the corner that I go and open when I've done everything else, when I suddenly remember it. And actually where it needs to be is right here in front of me on my desk, so that as you're doing everything, again, I think Sheena said, you know, include it from the beginning. And it's so easy to forget. We all do it. I did it recently. I was organizing an event and I suddenly realized that all the speakers were white. You know, but just getting into the way of doing that, of just, yeah, having it in front of you. But like I say, it's a journey. So tools can help, but it's not all.
Yeah. Thank you, Colin. I think this next one is for you as well. Very interesting talk. This is a question for Colin. How can we improve our awareness related to race issues in our society?
Well, there's loads of resources around. I'm happy to send a list. But yeah, if the person contacts me through the conference organizers. But you know, again, there's TED Talks, there's videos, there's TV programs, all of these things that I've learned a huge amount about the history of people of color, the challenges for people of color. And also there's some great stuff around being white. So there's a speaker called Robin DiAngelo who has been looking at whiteness and what it means to be white. So yeah, that's probably easier than anything else. But also, you know, one of the things that the model says is about surrounding yourself with people who are different. It's all very well reading about it or watching stuff about it, and that's really helpful. But there's nothing like talking to people who are from different groups, either as colleagues or whatever. And there's a lovely phrase that somebody used on a panel I was on, which I've nicked, which is respectful nosiness. And that is, you know, people often ask, is it okay to ask people if I'm working with a Muslim and I don't know Muslim people and what it's like to be Muslim, is it okay to ask? And I love this idea of, yeah, be nosy. Most people are happy to talk about that, but also recognize that some may not be, that actually talking about that background, talking about what it's like being Black or whatever, is actually emotional labor. You know, if somebody's had a hard day, they may not want to. So be respectful of people's boundaries, but at the same time, you know, do ask, because in a way that's the best way of learning.
Can I make a comment about race, Vicky, if that's all right?
Yes, of course, please.
I think, you know, one of the concerns for many of our businesses is that we have an 80% dependency on people from England. And yet people treat and use language, this anti-Englishness, which borders on racism. And I think you get called out in society quite rightly for labeling groups. And I think it's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but certainly from a business point of view, we don't like this anti-English sentiment that's coming out and has been heightened through the pandemic with regard to the border issues. I don't want to take over the whole question and probably sidetrack it a bit, but I think race needs to be looked at in a broader context sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Andrew.
Could I just quickly add to that? Totally agree with the comments, and I think it's really important to learn about race. It's very important to ask questions, read, be curious about some of the things that are current and being discussed. For example, now there's a lot of discussion in the news about the term white privilege. So go and find out what white privilege actually means. And please don't find out from the Daily Mail, but you know, read books, search online what it means, and you will soon find out that it is not about blame, it's not about invalidating the experiences or struggles of white people. There is a true meaning around white privilege. And once you understand the context, it puts you in a better position to actually contribute in being the change that we want to see.
Can I just support you on that, Elwyn? Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that people from a working class background or from a poor background who've had a hard life don't themselves have a lack of privilege as well, which is often how it's put. You know, it's often used to divide black working class people and white working class people. There's lots of different ways in which we have privilege and that we don't have privilege. And yeah, exactly what Elwyn says, find out what it really means.
Thank you. Okay, we're starting to run out of time. We do have another question.
Sorry,
yes.
Just to say that we do have a raised hand, so I think it'd be really good to hear from Sumitra. So I'm just going to give you the access to come on as a temporary panelist, and hopefully we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a wonderful session, and I've enjoyed all the talks. I had a question for Andrew and a comment for Sheena, if I may. I am from the University of Surrey, and I'm part of a project looking at travel motivations of Black and other ethnic minority groups. And a common grievance that you touched upon is the lack of representation, that quite often, you know, marketing literature doesn't speak to people of different ethnic backgrounds. Why do you think, and this is coming from industry leaders, minority ethnic leaders working in the tourism industry, why do you think this is such an uphill struggle?
I totally agree with you, and I'm part of the problem. You know, I'm an older middle-class grey suit individual, and there's just too many of us, to be quite honest with you, and I just wish it wasn't that way. I don't know why it is. You know, I think it's a continual challenge. I mean, I say to community groups where I live in Pembrokeshire, it's the same old people sitting around the table. Why can't we have younger people, ethnic minority groups, and so on and so forth? I don't think it's through the lack of trying. It's about the engagement, and I don't know why people don't feel the need to engage. And I think it probably comes back to, you know, if we interpret the marketing literature, we're not making. I live on the Pembrokeshire coast path. I'm very privileged to do so. I hardly see anyone walking from an ethnic minority background along the path. But it comes back to the marketing, because when you look at it, you don't feel inclusive, you don't feel a part of it. So we've got to do a much bigger job in doing that, and really work hard at bringing people forward to do it. But I haven't got it's a great question. I really haven't got a really good answer for you. I'm terribly sorry, but we can just do our bit. The ripple effect, as Colin said, is just great, and that's all we can do, and being inspired by that comment.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I'm very conscious of time. So very brief comment to Sheena. I'm really impressed and inspired by the work you're doing. Fantastic. And I'm part of the 1% of the people who go to national parks, and it's really frustrating to see not many people like me. So I just wondered if another thing you could probably do is reach out to content creators, bloggers, people who are speaking to the ethnic minorities. A lot of people, as you rightly said, they don't feel that they belong. They feel out of place, particularly in rural communities. And they look towards content creators, leaders within communities for advice before they go off the trail. So it's not because people are not motivated quite often, but it's because people are just not comfortable, and to break those barriers. So beyond the marketing literature, perhaps reach out to those sort of, connections.
It's a great comment. Thank you. Yeah, so there's you're probably familiar with Black Girls Hike, Anita Sethi's book, I Belong Here. I think there are some real great pockets of activity starting to happen, and one of the things that we want to do is maybe to start working more closely, and we do invite people to come and stay, and influencers and things like that, because that's exactly how it starts to get the word out that it's okay, and yeah, we can help it make you feel comfortable and confident to do this.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for your questions there. Thank you. And thank you to the panel for your answers. We do have quite a few questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer them now, but maybe we can come back to them later and post them on the webpage. So thanks again to our speakers for the session this morning. Thank you to our attendees. We're now going to break now for 15 minutes, and then we start again then at 11:30, when you can head back then to the event webpage and click on the link for part 2. So thank you, and see you again very shortly.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.